Hello and welcome to a Sonic Loud special. We've got Tom here from Universal Audio with some exciting new products. We haven't seen you for about a year, but
since NAMM, I think.
Yeah, well, let's see what you got.
Thanks so much. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having us in. So, we're announcing the Apollo X4 desktop interface right here, right now.
Wow. Okay, so this is it's got the new X mics.
So X series converters, that was the real thing with Apollo X rack mount, which we launched way back in September last year, was the rack mount Apollos, which have the next generation of Apollo converter technology, which we dubbed Apollo X.
Right.
And so we're now bringing that into the desktop format.
And this is slightly bigger than the original desktop, isn't it? It's got, because it's accommodating more inputs and outputs.
So Apollo X4 is now the biggest offering we have for the desktop interface range, which is now 4 products, starting with Arrow at the bottom as a solo bus-powered Thunderbolt 3 interface. We're now also announcing right next to you, we can grab it.
Oh, this is the
Apollo Twin X.
Apollo Twin X, which is same format, same sort of form factor as you'd expect, you know, from the standard Apollo, but with what? X mic pre's and...
So the Unison mic preamps are the same, but it's got the X series conversion in it, so the same as the X4 here. So now we've got this offered as a duo DSP and a quad, which we'll get into in a minute, but you know, the amount of DSP. But there's Apollo Twin X with 2 new DSP offerings, the duo and the quad. The Twin Solo, which we previously did, is now effectively replaced by the Arrow in that sense. So that's like your solo DSP kind of bus power box, which we have over there. I'll show it in a sec. And then the flagship on the desktop is the Apollo X4.
And so what kind of DSP do we get in this? Is this start at duo or it starts at quad?
There's one model in the X4, and that's a quad DSP, and it's got 4 Unison mic preamps on it as well. So the same Unison preamps across the entire range of all of our interfaces, but now bringing the X series conversion to the desktop.
Right. So perhaps those people who don't know what the Apollo platform is, the UA platform, you know, but just a kind of brief précis.
A rewind.
Yeah.
Yeah, so since 2012 we have a range of audio interfaces. So obviously people are aware of audio interfaces, hopefully, ins and outs to the computer.
Yeah.
Now the full range is standardised on Thunderbolt 3, so it's the first sort of multi-unit Thunderbolt 3.
Which is a USB-C type connector, which makes it... That's good news, folks, because that basically means the cables that you probably get with your MacBooks and other products will work with this, right?
Sort
of.
More or less? Well, ish. It's actually, yeah, that's a tangential point, but the white cables you get with your MacBooks to charge them are USB charge cables, not Thunderbolt 3 cables, so they won't actually work. You have to still get a Thunderbolt 3, Thunderbolt 3 cable.
But no adapters, no.
But you won't need, you won't need the sort of the big Apple adapter to go Thunderbolt 2 to 3. The little tip actually on the cables is to look for the little Lightning logo on the the barrel of the connector. There's normally a bigger connector because there's often a lot of active. There's a little chip inside there. And
right. Okay. Got you.
So we're standardised on Thunderbolt 3, but the thing with the Apollo is it's an interface range which lets you effectively get ins and outs of your computer, but change the sound on the way in. So you can track through our world-renowned plugin library. So previously we've been doing plugins since the early 2000s, really, or the start of the millennium, with UAD processing and all that modelling of vintage analog equipment and compressors and equalisers. The thing with Apollo is it's a real-time platform. It lets you bring that into the interface up front before the DAW.
So real time, so you can effectively process it on an input, which was that was the really big kind of the key thing with the Apollo stuff, wasn't it? It's like you can process live inputs. So people were using them not only for recording like virtual channels, but for live processing of, you know, specific vocal sounds or whatever it may be. So
yeah, I mean, the way I try and describe all the Apollos now, including the Arrow, is that they are an interface, but ultimately it's a creative tool. It's a way of finding your sound. You know, we've got over 150 plugins in the library, and you obviously get a bunch with the interfaces as you start. And that allows you to customize the sound, whether it be guitar amplifiers. So, you know, all of our interfaces come with a Marshall Plexi Classic Unison-enabled guitar amplifier. So we'll get to Unison in a minute. We also now include the SVT Classic, the Ampeg bass amp. So you can get really good guitar and bass sounds just plugging straight into the front of the interface.
Right, so you've got that kind of high Z input. So you mentioned Unison. Unison is the technology which kind of adapts the electronics of the mic pre depending on what plugin you're running. So if you're running a Neve, it will match the impedance that you get on a Neve or in a nutshell.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it's called Unison, because it's the analog domain and the digital domain working in tandem together or in unison to create the sound of the real piece of gear we're modelling. So with the X4, you've got 4 Unison mic preamp inputs. So really, you know, the big thing for us with X4 was this is like the collaborative do-everything desktop interface.
Right.
If you wish, you know, kick, snare, overheads. You've got a great portable drum recording platform.
Right, yeah.
And of course, then you can start to do things like tube preamp emulation on the kick and the different one on the snare. Maybe you go with an API or an SSL. You can track to tape with our Oxide or Studio plugins and actually print that stuff straight into your computer. So you're committing to the sound as you record.
It's interesting, the technology for many years is an enabler in terms of you can offset the decision till the last minute. But what I've noticed happen, because we talked to Steve Evans, who's done a couple of things on the Apollo with us, he said it's made him make the sound up front and just print it. And so in a way, it's kind of almost enabling that kind of just getting on with it and printing the sound that you want from the outset, which is kind of quite old school in a way.
It is, yeah. I mean, that was a great set of videos you guys did with the Apollo X racks, the new launch of the racks. And that just shows you kind of what the platform brings. It's not just an interface, it's a creative tool. It's a colouring box. It's like, what do you want your music to sound like? Well, let's find that and just record or play, even playing through it. So as a practice tool, plugging a guitar in, playing through a Fender modelled guitar amplifier with, a great chain on it, which is the thing I like to tell people, guitar sounds don't stop at the amp and pedal board, which is what a lot of guitar players focused all of their attention on. But when you end up recording them, you've got mic choice, mic placement, you've got, the console chain after it, the outboard it was mixed through, the send effects that it's going to hit. And that's something you can load in its entirety into Apollo console, which is running on your computer. And that's actually, the GUI's running on the computer, but all the processing is happening on the DSP in the Apollo. So
coming back to the sort of physicality of the unit, I mean, the front panel is very familiar. We've got obviously 4 channels of mic pre. What other I/O have we got on here as well?
So yeah, aside from those 4 mic and line inputs, which you can sort of jump between here with that preamp switch, you've also got an ADAT in and an out now, whereas the Twin X has an ADAT input, which can be configured as an 8-channel ADAT or a stereo SPDIF optical.
So we've got, that gives us a lot more I/O on this unit, right?
Yeah, so this is 12 in and 18 out. So the big feature here is two guitar inputs, 2 headphone outputs, 4 key buses internally instead of 2, which is what you get on the Twin.
Right.
So you could, for example, use the ADAT output to feed something like a Hearback, where you've got a personal headphone mix platform, and everyone then has a key bus for like the drummer and or a stereo drums mix, a stereo.
You can have a rack of mic amps attached to one of the ADAT inputs as well, so you have like 12 live inputs on that, right? 12
live inputs, and then all mixed in real time with no latency through the Apollo console to those key buses and out to something on ADAT, for example. Or you might have an A to D converter hooked up on the ADAT, so you can then do things like more hardware inserts for mixing from Pro Tools or Logic and that kind of thing.
So any other features that are new with this new hardware?
Well, the big upgrade is the converters, which is the thing that sort of brings us to the X series in general, really. So there's a big iterative leap with the conversion performance. I'm still waiting for full specs because these are so hot off the production line.
Right, you only got them a couple of days ago, right?
Literally like 2 days ago, yeah. It's the first time the Twin's been out. But this is 127 dB of dynamic range.
Right, that's pretty decent.
Very decent, yeah. Considering the Mark II Twin on the monitor outs was 115, that's a big leap.
Right.
And then also, and this is the thing that makes it really important with the X series, is the distortion is very much lower. So we're now at minus 117 dB THD plus noise.
Right, which again, I mean, look it up, they are actually decent figures. So I suppose you could use this as a quad surround sound controller as well? Does it work on that?
That's an interesting question. It doesn't do 5.1 or 7.1. You've got 6 line outputs, so you could in theory do 5.1, but we're reserving that feature for the Apollo racks.
Right, okay. So all of this is the same control, so we've got the console software that controls the kind of the plug-in instantiation and all that kind of real-time stuff. Does any of this ever come with a kind of a way that you can kind of make the code more efficient? So can you get more plugins running, or is it still you just still get the same DSP? You just get 4 of them in one of these?
Well, there's a few changes we've made in the software domain since the version 9.10 launch that came out a couple of weeks ago, which is it's a good time to bring that up. So have you ever come across the virtual channels that exist in the console itself?
I don't think so. Are they the ones that you can record dry or affected through? Is that the way it works?
Well, so you have UAD Rec and UAD Mon. So over here you see these little dots are blue, and you've got this master sort of toggle switch. UAD Rec goes red. That allows you to track through the plugins or just monitor them, for example, in the insert slots. Anything in this Unison slot up front, which is the bit that's in tandem with the hardware, will always be recorded like that. But the virtual channels are this bank over here to the right. We've got virtual 1, 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 there. So there's 8 virtual channels.
Yeah.
They're designed effectively like a loopback channel. So what we found is a lot of people will use those for bringing out iTunes or Spotify or something they want to play back, like system sounds, into
into the UA
console.
world, right? Yeah.
Well, sometimes that might just be a click feed or a headphone mix feed from your DAW into the console. That way it allows you to see it, you can meter it against your live inputs, and use the aux sends within console, for example, any of these 4 available Q buses to create a blend of what's coming back in versus what's coming in live on the actual inputs. But what we found is a lot of people are using maybe 2 of those for playback or a Q mix, but not necessarily all of them. So on Apollo racks, you get 8 virtuals, and that's the same feature on Apollo X4, 8 virtuals. On a Twin, so Twin X or Twin Mark II, you have 4 virtuals. And one of the features that we've just announced, which you can see in this system panel here, which is huge, because when I saw you a couple of years ago with the Mark II Twin, I was running quite a substantial plug-in input chain.
Yeah.
And there are ways of trying to eke out power there.
But they run on across a single DSP, didn't they? So that you can't go too large because the DSP can only handle so much processing, right?
Exactly. So now what we've done with this is allowed this feature called DSP pairing, where you will sort of effectively trade the number of virtual channels you've got. So if you see there, I've moved to the middle, and I've halved the amount of virtuals, so I've gone from 8 to 4.
Right.
But that's now given me 2 DSP pairs.
Right, so that means for a single channel you could have a ridiculously or a much larger effects change, right?
Absolutely. So what's going to happen is this is a quad, but you've now got 2 pairs. So you could have signal coming into from one channel into a DSP, processed there, maxed out, going to another DSP, processed there, and then recorded. So you've now effectively doubled your processing capability on an input. But because it's quite non-linear and it will pair in the best efficient way, it will actually take all 4 inputs or even the ADAT inputs and find a way of shuffling all the plugins in those pairings to give you the most power. So it's a real big boon for tracking.
Particularly if you're running like a stereo pairing and you really want to process those channels a lot.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, the big one is now we've got 2 instrument inputs on X4. The collaborative aspect of having 2 guitar players putting down parts
through a massive
effect 2 virtual
chain.
Guitar chains, exactly. Where you would.
Right, and that's just has that just come out, or is that coming out with the announcement? Of
that release came out a few weeks ago, actually,
in
version 9.10, and we're doing a 9.10.2 in a few days to support the Twin X and the X4. But that's a really neat feature. The second part of that is because we've now allowed you to trade the virtual channels in order to get a bit more control over inputs coming in versus tracks on playback. We've now added a plus 12 dB on the input faders. So you've got more gain in the monitor mix.
So it sounds like, as we've seen before, people tend to use these. We've got 2 kind of case usage, aren't they? You've got somebody who this kind of thing is going to be their only audio interface. They might be a singer-songwriter, and they're using it to process and then process their mixes. But then you've also got producers who maybe have a big rack of UAD hardware, but they take this out with their laptop to do some sort of field recording or whatever. So this caters for kind of both of those.
It does. I think a lot of people, this is going to be the only box you need to do. You've got Quad DSP for mixing when you need to run UA plugins in mix. You can track through that. With now DSP pairing, you've doubled your input processing. 4 inputs is enough for a lot of people, especially if you're overdubbing. String quartet, a piano with a pair of room mics, kick snare overheads or mono overhead.
And then you've also got the ADAT interface, so you could bring a little rack of ADAT mic preamps if you wanted as well.
Yeah, exactly. And the nice thing here is because it's got extra line outputs, so over a Twin which had monitor outs left and right and then outs 3 and 4, so 4 outputs, this has 6. So if you're in the monitor world here, as it stands now, we've got the regular functions like mute, mono, dim, and a talkback mic built in here, which we've actually improved slightly on the X desktop as well.
Right.
So between the Twin and the X4, we've changed the filtering and made a few improvements to the clarity of the talkback mic, which is always nice, a little iterative thing. But there's 2 switches in the middle, as you'll see at the moment, aren't engaged to do anything. But if we come over here to the settings menu, I can change that to be 1 alt speaker count, and this then illuminates. And I now have the ability to set, a monitoring level for
a second monitor.
Yeah, and so in software, in the control room section here, you have a trim. So we can create here an alt trim. So I could have a near field and a main pair level matched and then just switch between them. But the beauty with the X4, and this is why I think for in-the-box mixing and production, might be all you ever need. that extra.
It's funny, isn't it? Because
outputs.
I mean, this takes me back. I remember, there were back in the late '80s and early '90s, there were sort of Daniel Lanois and all these producers taking over stately homes and wheeling in these huge kind of recording setups to make albums with high budget bands. Was this sort of similar sort of vibe? Obviously, I haven't got quite the same channel count, but it's a similar, enabling the similar thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of records these days are made with, a couple of synths coming in, or especially now stereo DI, you could DI your synths in here if you want to get a bit of juice on those and colour those up in a certain way, do your drum recording, do some vocal tracking. You've got the ability to switch between 3 pairs of monitors, so now if I engage alt count 2, you'll see we've got alt, and then the function switch becomes a second alternative pair, or technically the third pair, so you've got main pair of speakers, near fields,
right,
and auratones or something like that,
right,
squawk box type of thing. So you can use the outputs for this, or having an extra pair of outputs compared to a twin lets you have like a hardware insert loop whilst also still having like a near field and a main, which is quite common.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of like desktop.
I've got to ask,
monster.
the other thing is, obviously this comes up every time we talk about console software. Everybody says, any chance of MIDI control for levels and mutes or anything like that coming up soon?
Still not yet,
okay.
But like I say, I think I said last time, the Softube Console 1 has the Apollo Central control mode, which does quite a good job of giving you access to all the cue mix levels, the monitor mix levels, the solos and mutes. So if you're tracking, that effectively becomes a controller to use alongside this if you so determine.
So these guys, both of these are available now, or when will they be coming out?
October the 22nd is the launch date.
Right, okay. So we're filming this before, which is why I'm asking.
About a week, about a week's time from now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And have we got any idea of pricing on these?
Yes, so this is $17.99
right.
For European pricing. I would recommend really checking your local retailer for euros and pounds translations due to certain governmental factors.
That's the US dollar minimum advertised price, right? So that's right. Okay, so that's going to be fixed, whereas in Europe people can vary.
Yeah, that'll all vary, but you're looking at sort of a conversion from $17.99 US dollars.
And what about the Twin X?
So Twin X comes in quad and duo. Like I say, the solo no longer exists in that model, and that is $13.99 for the quad US dollars and $8.99 for the
So it's still
duo.
premium, but it feels like it's got it's got an advancement there. So this has just got the optical in, so it's the same sort of format as the original Apollo Twin.
Exactly the same. Upgraded converters, like I say, big leap in specification, better ventilation because we've now moved to hotter converters and etc. etc. Talkback mic improvement, but otherwise the Twin is very much like an iterative move forwards on the platform. And the slogan for it is "Reborn to make records," when previously we were born to make records. So it's just it's extending that thing. But X4 is just like that slightly more advanced desktop product. If you really want something,
I kind of like it. It's almost like a totally configurable digital console. It's kind of almost it's like the paradigm there to a degree, but with an audio interface built in. So
yeah, that's what I think. We start by saying, well, Apollo is an audio interface. When you look at what it actually provides you as an end user, the ability to have monitor reverb, monitor delay, change the sound of the preamp, use a virtual guitar amp or bass amp, take your synths in, trash them through a Moog filter and then record it.
Right.
You perform through the effect. So I say to people, even if you don't record the effect and you're leaving it in the monitor path in the console, so it's just in your headphones, you'll perform against the effect. It's like a brick wall that you lean against and it's doing a bit of this. And there's a reaction, there's an interaction that happens there. And that, to me, is...
It's different to putting it afterwards where you wouldn't necessarily play to it.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So that's all happening with effectively sub 2 milliseconds of latency at, varying sample rates and all that sort of jazz. But that's really where we're at with this range of products. It's, all Thunderbolt 3 matches the Apollo X racks, new DSP pairing features.
And these will integrate with a wider X system as well, so you can...
Yeah, so I think we talked about it before, but you can have 6 devices connected over Thunderbolt. So you'll notice with X4 and with the Twin X, you have a single Thunderbolt connector, which means they are the last device in that daisy chain. But before that, you could go up to there's 4 Apollos in one system, but up to 6 devices, so it can get a bit... You have to try and remember, what the sort of do's and don'ts are. But because we have, I don't know whether you saw about a month ago, we launched the Thunderbolt 3 DSP satellites.
Yeah.
So they're all now standardized Thunderbolt 3 with 2 connectors.
So you could through those.
Yeah, so when I say this might be all you ever need, it might be all you ever need in an I/O point of view, but adding something like an octo satellite or even a stack of octo satellites next to this, in a suitcase, you've basically got X-series converters, all your monitor switching.
And that'll work on real-time processing as well?
So they don't. So the way that the satellites work is to host plugins in what we call asynchronous mode, where they're running in the DAW independently as a plugin and not within console up front. So people do ask this, you know, can I buy a satellite to supercharge? Yeah, you can't, but that's why we've done the DSP pairing feature, because that allows you to now double up the power on the way in. But the cool thing is, each box has its own local DSP. So this is a quad, and it has 8 virtuals that can be traded to DSP pairs. In fact, you can see here, if I trade all the virtuals, we now have 4 DSP pairs, which is an interesting point. I have 4 chips, but I have 4 pairs.
How does that work?
We use the pairs twice. So you could go
whatever's
into one
left.
chip, whatever's left, it could be used.
You're coming from the top and the bottom.
Exactly, that's the best. Yeah, a diagram makes sense of all that. But that's a really nice thing because that's per box. So say, for example, you had an Apollo X 8P, or 3 of them, they have the ability to have another 4 DSP pairs per rack.
Right.
And so with a system that lets you have 4 Apollos, I could have an X4, which is my pickup and go and my monitor controller, and 3 X8Ps as a 24 input mic pre-rig. All of them now have got pairing functionality per unit to give you more input processing. So it's a huge leap in power for tracking. And then all of that is available as one big pot of DSP for mixing afterwards in plugin world. And you can still add, on top of 4 Apollos, 2 more Octo satellites to make 6 total.
Wow, okay. In case you need them, of course.
Yeah, well, I see some guys, we have a couple of film mixers that do the big Hollywood movies that have a twin or an Apollo as their playback device. Or now an Apollo X rack, so they could do 5.1 or 7.1 mixes, but then a tower of 5 octos next to that.
Right.
So they've got enough DSP to pull up 1,000 channels of orchestral overdubs.
Footsteps. Yeah.
Well, yeah, or just like passes of like 60 mics of orchestra going down on top of each other.
Right.
Overdubs and overdubs of 60 mics.
Wow.
You know, it's definitely doable, and then you can just bring that up for mixing, you know, locally on your Apollo rig. So that's kind of how we see the whole thing.
It's
like
just hugely extensible to fit the need.
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned Arrow earlier, which is that is now the solo DSP offering. So obviously that doesn't do DSP pairing because it has one chip. But that is your bus-powered Thunderbolt 3 pick-up and go travel box.
Right.
So you could have that connected to an Apollo rack if you wish, and that's your travel unit. But if you're looking for something that goes beyond the feature set of this,
the X.
Yeah, then you go into the X series conversion where we've got Duo Quad or
They look nice together, don't they?
Yeah, they're great. It's a beautiful looking product. And so now the whole family is complete.
Tom, thank you very much for coming in. I guess if you're watching this, then they'll be out now, so you can find all the information you need at uaudio.com. That's it for this time. See you next time. Thanks for watching.